So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Soltman. Michael?
Hello and welcome. And I want to tell you how happy I am to be back in the San Juan Islands. My wife and I have returned to Paideia Harbor after having been here as your superintendent of San Juan School District from 2002 to 2009. It's really fun to be able to come back. So I went to Vashon to be superintendent for a while. My body went, but my heart stayed here. So excited to be able to do this forum with you today. So the panelists have been introduced, and I have to say, from the position of being a retired superintendent, I couldn't think of a better time to retire, given what my colleagues here are having to face and deal with in this challenge. And I appreciate the intelligence and the strength and the creativity that they've had to bring to this in order to be able to manage their way through. I'm going to ask my panelists to mute, and then I'm going to invite Brendan to unmute. I want to welcome Brendan. Brendan has been our Director of Emergency Management since I was here in the early 2000s. Brendan, how long have you been doing this?
2003, I think, somewhere right around there. Yeah, good while now.
Yeah, and you're only about 28 years old now, so you know
that's right, which is like 340 in COVID years.
I guess so. You know, the COVID thing has really been a challenge, not only for schools but for communities. And there's just a lot of questions, I think, that comes up in a community like ours about who's really in charge and what are the roles of everybody in here. And so what's the role of Frank James as our health officer and of you as our emergency person, and how do you guys do that and work in concert with our school districts? Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about that and how you do it?
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. And I mean, clearly those questions apply to the local level and all the way up to the top of government in our country. And people sitting around scratching their heads trying to figure out who all these folks are and what their roles are. It's relatively simple here in the county. I mean, the most important thing is it's a team effort. So the County Health and Community Services Department is the lead. They're the lead agency for the overall response, but that doesn't mean they're doing it themselves, right? They're getting lots of support from, healthcare providers and community organizations and, many county departments in the town and the schools. And so nothing about this is hierarchical or clearly just falling in one organization or person's lap. That all said, Dr. James is the county health officer. He's an employee of the health department. And he's the one person of all of us who has the authority to actually set rules and regulations that form requirements in the county. He does consult with not only the health department, but the elected officials in the county and beyond, with the 7-person Board of Health here in San Juan County, which is comprised of elected officials from both the town of Paideia Harbor and the county, as well as a handful of mostly retired medical providers here in the islands. So I would say that, for Dr. James, issuing a health officer order is kind of an action of last resort. And the first thing that we always want to do is just try to get the community and our partners kind of in under the tent together, working thoughtfully. And 99 times out of 100, that's great. And that's all we need. But Dr. James does have that kind of stick on the back end, which he can utilize as he needs to. I think in relation to the topic today is very much schools. And I just think it's really important to highlight, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but the county is never out in front of the schools. Everything that's happening in relation to schools needs to be done kind of lockstep between Dr. James and the county health department and the schools overall. And that's been happening all the way back to the early days of this pandemic. And frankly, even before COVID, the schools and the health department work closely all the time on all sorts of issues. And those conversations have been ongoing. So it's certainly not Dr. James or the health officer's intent to dictate to the schools or tell them how things have to be, but really to have it be a partnership and a cooperative conversation. So hopefully that kind of sets a little bit of the stage.
Yeah, so I think what you might be saying is that in each school district, it's a local decision. However, Dr. James could have the final authority if he needed to be that directive.
Yeah, I don't imagine any scenario where this would be the case in San Juan County, but certainly it would be possible that Dr. James could say, actually, here's how we're going to do it. But that would not be our first choice by a long shot.
So, we've had some curiosity about how we managed to make it through that tourist season with all of these people coming from off island and not infecting everybody in here. And I'm just wondering how you account for that success and sort of what happened there? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, let me preface this by saying that if anyone tells you they know exactly what happened or didn't happen or is going to happen in relation to COVID, take a close look at things a week later or 10 days later, and chances are they're wrong. So it's a fool's game to try to predict too much of this, but there's some thoughts out there. And the first thing to keep in mind is that we live in a very small jurisdiction. I mean, for all of us, this feels like the center of the universe, but there are only 17, 18,000 of us here. And so just through the law of numbers and how things work, the prevalence of COVID is patchy, right? It pops up in places, it increases exponentially, and then it comes up somewhere else. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't get overconfident. We have not had a lot of cases. We had a really nice stretch from early August until maybe just a couple of weeks ago where we really didn't have any cases. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think we've done a lot of smart things that contribute to that, but I just want to put an asterisk after all of this saying that doesn't mean it couldn't change tomorrow. In terms of the tourist season and how we kind of got through that, I think one thing that we've come to see is that the way this disease spreads is through up close, in-person, household contact while people are unmasked. That's not to say it can't be spread in other settings or other environments, but almost everything we're seeing is people sitting next to each other in buildings, people working together in close contact, people sitting next to each other on airplanes. And I think early on in this, there was a lot of fear that, passing somebody on the street or walking by someone in the aisle of the supermarket was going to be our problem. And I don't think we can say that that's never a problem or that that's 100% safe, but it's very clear that walking by tourists, as they get off the ferry is not a major source of concern, especially when everyone's masked up. And I think, one of the real success stories for the islands is that we were, I'm not sure how many weeks, but a number of weeks ahead of the rest of the state, and then that many more weeks ahead of the rest of the country with a mask order. And that wasn't always easy at the beginning. There was some resistance to that, but I think looking back on it, that was a real success for the islands and the health department and Dr. James that we can look back on and say really got us off on the right foot in the summer. I think there are lots of other things, like we live in a community where people are willing to respect science and make good decisions and sacrifice for the greater good. And it's hard to imagine a community where we would be more well suited to have success in this. We've got good leadership, and then just the overall energy of the community has been, despite all the struggle, has been very positive. The community organizations and nonprofits and medical providers and schools, I mean, there's just been a whole bunch of folks who've been rolling up their sleeves to sacrifice to get us to the point where we are today. So hopefully we just keep that going. I'm sure I'll talk about this more, but I think we're about to enter what may very well be the hardest stretch of this whole thing to date. So, yeah.
As school leaders, we sort of observe what goes on around the country and the fits and starts that we see in terms of schools starting or stopping. I mean, they try and they attempt to go out and make a plan, and then the plan changes. And a lot of that has to do with how prepared a community is to deal with whatever outbreak would come, and what the access to PPE and to testing and to other support services. How rich are we in this county in services and PPE that would allow us to open schools more, but have the confidence that when that outbreak comes or when that case shows up, that we can have the kind of immediate testing and follow-up that we would need. How are we?
Well, I mean, let me say this. On sort of the basic metrics, we're very well prepared. I mean, we have a good supply of PPE in the county, not just on the school front, but on lots of other, for our first responders and healthcare providers. And our healthcare providers are doing pretty well with maintaining their own supplies. We have pretty good testing supplies. A lot of it's not about the stuff, but it's about the people, right? So when you look at where the challenges are going to be, it's not going to be us not having enough test kits. It's going to be how many people do we have who can go out and test at a particular time on a particular day. And we feel pretty good about our ability to do this. And we've had good luck so far as we've had cases pop up, being able to get out there quickly and kind of do ring testing, which is testing all the people who we think might be exposed. And same on the contact tracing piece, right? I mean, one of the unfortunate benefits of this is that we've become much better at contact tracing, and the health department team is pretty sophisticated in what they're doing. But all said, I mean, I'm a disaster guy, so I have a good imagination, but it's easy to picture a scenario where we overwhelm that, right? So we could have all the PPE and the testing supplies in the world, but if we're not doing a good job of minimizing the spread of the disease and doing everything we can to be thoughtful and safe, it's easy to come up with a scenario where it doesn't matter, we could have 4 mountains full of PPE here and we're still in trouble. So, what's going to save us is people being thoughtful, doing the right thing, and kind of following the guidelines that I think at this point we're all pretty familiar with. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. Happy to go into more detail if it's helpful.
I did get a question in advance, and I don't know if this information is correct. I didn't get a chance to check it out, but the person who sent it in implied that at one of our private schools, not Paideia, Kori, at one of our private schools, that parents have access to home testing for PPE for COVID, and that they're testing their kids at home, which allows that school to be able to function. Do you know anything about that? Is that actually an option that schools have? Is a whole bunch of home testing kits?
Well, I don't, I can't speak to any specific about what a private school is or is not doing. There are, and we're actually going to just put out in the next week, we've been doing these hot topics that we're putting out into the media and on the county website, trying to go into a little bit more of a deep dive on issues that people are talking about or thinking about and wondering about. We're going to do one on at-home testing because there are a number of options out there where if you have the resources and the wherewithal, depending on what school we're talking. But if it's a smaller school, if it's with good resources, it might be easier than in a larger school. There are at-home testing options out there, and it's pretty straightforward. It's not very difficult to do. It costs a decent amount of money, but it's doable. The thing with testing is that it only provides a snapshot in time, right? So I could have been exposed to the disease at point A, I'll be tested at point B, and depending on the timing of how that works, I could actually become infectious after I took that test. Or I could take that test and I could walk out the door, have coffee with a friend and be infected, and then I'm positive again. So, testing should not give anyone confidence that things are 100% squared away and it guarantees that there's no transmission. It's another level of security, but you have to be testing people all the time in order to maintain that level of security. So it's not a bad idea. It's not an idea that has no merit, but it's a resource-intensive idea that's got some challenges that go along with it as well. So, yeah.
We're heading into the holiday season, and what I've been reading lately is that the greatest spread of the virus right now is happening through friend groups and family groups and smaller groups. And as I look forward into the holidays, and from the point of view of a school administrator, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that is just fraught with so much opportunity to blow any plans I have for opening school because of what might happen over this time. What's your thought about that? And what do we do to protect against that so that we can get our schools back in?
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's not just a school issue, right? I mean, it's a community-wide issue. And I think, I'm sure the superintendents will talk about this more, but there's no line between schools and the greater community. I mean, in my experience in the islands, the schools are our community. So, in order to keep the schools open, we have to keep the community open and vice versa. So, everything that I'm about to say is not a school answer, it's a San Juan County answer. I think we're all right to be concerned about holiday travel. I mean, we were talking about the tourist risk in the summer and how that didn't end up being a big problem, which is true. All the cases that we did see, or nearly all the cases that we saw, were from people sharing close indoor contact with people who were visiting from other places, who weren't just sort of like tourists staying at a hotel for the night, but were family members, friends coming to visit, or islanders who went other places, had that sort of contact with friends or family in other places, and then came back to the island. And I think that's the same sort of thing we're going to see, or maybe even already seeing as we head into the holidays. And I think, the way that we avoid that, and it's never going to be 0 or 100%. What we need to do is just tamp down the likelihood of there being transmission. And, the first line is, everybody should stay home with their their close household family members. They shouldn't travel. They shouldn't have people visit them, and they should really hunker down. And that's the safest. And if you can do that, great. We just put out a hot topic last week that sort of, the messaging on it is, do that. That's your first level of defense. But let's face it, we know that not everyone is going to do that, or not everyone's going to be able to do that. Some people are going to have family come visit. And, I don't have time to go into all the detail here, but there's some simple things that you can do where it's not like it's all or nothing, right? So there's the safest thing. And then if you're not quite able to do that, let's make sure we do this next thing as safely as possible. And that could be, if you have family coming to visit, it would be better if they stayed in a hotel as opposed to in your house with you. If you have family coming to visit, it'd be better if they drove in a car in individual family units, as opposed to like picking up grandma and grandson Phil and driving all out in the minivan together, right? It's much better if they drive than if they fly. Once they're here, are there ways to do gatherings that are more off? And we all know outdoors is better. We also all know that the weather in the islands in November tends to be pretty dreary, but there are creative ways to try to minimize some of that risk. And so I just think it's a balance, right? And we certainly not be having the holiday gathering where we bring together 6 or 7 families from 4 different states and 3 generations of people and all get together and cook dinner together for 2 days and then all sit around a table. I understand and empathize with the need to see some family. But if we're going to do that, we need to A, understand that there's a risk with it, and B, do everything we can to try to minimize that risk as much as possible. I think it's just, we all know what's happening around the country in terms of spiking cases. And so I think everything we have to do is just be flexible and recognize that if things really start to go south, and this kind of comes into the school question as well, if things start to change quickly, then we modify, right? And we don't know exactly what the future is going to bring. We don't know what it's going to look like. But if we have the right people talking, whether it be at a community level or a family level, then we can make the right decision and try to keep things safe. So.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much. And you've given me just great permission not to invite that Uncle Ed over for Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. And thanks, Larry, for making this happen.
Yeah. Hopefully you can stay with us a little bit in case questions come up along the way. But thank you so much. Well, wonderful. Let's talk with a couple of our school leaders here. And I'd like to start with Brian and Kori and just sort of check in with them about what's going on in their schools briefly, and if possible, let's have a little forecasting about where they see this thing going for them in the next, I don't know, what, 20 to 30 days is probably about as far as we can go. But what's going on and what are you thinking about doing? Brian, you want to give it a start? And you'll have to unmute.
Yeah, happy to start, Michael. Thank you. And thanks, Larry, for having us all on. It's nice to get the messages out to everybody and be able just to share kind of our thoughts and where we're going with stuff. So yeah, currently Lopez is much like Shaw. Our size and capacity and staffing numbers keeps us more in that virtual model right now. So we've kind of kicked it up a notch. We're doing what we refer to as a virtual plus model. We have a handful of teachers doing outdoor classrooms with about 5 kids in those outdoor settings. I was just here actually yesterday setting up one of our outside shelters. We have a heat source and light source and stuff will get plugged into those things, but creating those opportunities where teachers can connect with kids and get some real genuine learning going on, because that's been kind of the message from teachers, is that the virtual world is working much better than it was last spring. By no means is it perfect, but teachers are wanting that connection with kids, and kids are wanting that connection with their teacher. And so there's some learning that's able to happen in those small groups. That's ideally for us what we're moving towards. Lopez probably will not go to a hybrid model at this time or within the next few months, we're going to reassess probably middle of January. Our big concern is the Thanksgiving holiday coming up. After talking with the county health officials, we know that that holiday has a lot of potential for a lot of interactions with families. And so there's a concern there with that. And, you know, teachers are rightfully wary of that and those interactions. So there's some caution around that, and we want to just take those safe steps moving forward. So that kind of gives you a little snapshot of what we're doing currently with our Virtual Plus model and what we're looking at in the near future. And like I said, in about the middle of January, we'll reassess, see where the county's at and the nation's at, and just kind of make plans there. And I think one of our big factors right now that we're considering is the fact that we're seeing numbers in our nation go up. And there's a correlation to those states that have more schools opening up. And so that correlation where the schools are opening up, we're seeing the numbers go up. And so there's some concern around that and just watching that at this point.
Thank you. Kori, tell us what's up with you in Paideia.
Yeah, we have very small numbers at our school. We were able to open up fully from right before Labor Day. So we've been in school for 9 weeks. The kids are going to school all day. Some of the harder aspects of that is like lunchtime when they have to unmask to eat their food. So that's one consideration as we head into the colder weather is if we were to have an uptick in cases, we would probably cut back to a half day so that we weren't eating together. We've worked really hard to give the kids mask breaks and have a lot of options where we're still able to learn in class. At this point, you know, we really don't want to have to go to Zoom unless we have a case that pops up in our school. Then we will go immediately to teleschool until we know everyone is clear and we can come back.
Great. Kori, remind us again how many students you have in your school.
We have 17 students and we have 3 teachers. And each classroom is, we have a classroom of 3, 6, and 8 sizes, and all the kids are spread out. We have a lot of things in place when they come and check in the school with temperature checks and health screenings. If a student should get sick and we follow the health department's guidelines for a class A symptom versus a class B symptom, we've already had one student required to have a COVID test before returning based on the type of symptoms they had. So we're kind of working very closely with the health department. So if we do have a child sick, we want to know the best course of action and what do we need to do as a school if, you know, if we think there's a potential case.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Fred, what's going on with Friday Harbor?
Well, in Friday Harbor, we were glad to start our first group of students coming back to school. This Thursday, we just opened up kindergarten, and next week we'll bring in the first grade, and the week after that we're going to bring in the second grade. And so it's really exciting to see that we've got to that point. We had said that we were going to monitor over the first 9 weeks and then make a decision, and then with our subcommittees and steering committees, we made the decision to stagger a start and begin with the lowest grades, K through 2, and primarily because we're really concerned about, you know, it's shown that if students are reading at grade level by 3rd grade, their academic career just is better. And so it was really important for us to do that, and the amount of work that went into that just to create a safe situation, as safe as you can to mitigate the concerns has been quite an undertaking. And I got to tell you, as someone that was down there watching them, walking with a little girl that went from the bus to the front door or to her entry point to have the visual screening and the temperature check, she looked up at me, you know, of course, all 6'3", and she's, you know, way down there, and she said, you know, I thought I was going to be shy, but I decided to be excited. And most of them were excited to get back into the building, and then seeing the teachers that we have, that we, you know, we're in cohorts, an AM, PM cohort, and I can talk later about why we chose that, but you only have anywhere from 6 to 8 students in the classroom at a time. And we were able to keep, for those people that families, we still did not want to send their children to school, we're able to continue a form of a teleschooling for them as well, and we're able to do that K through 2. And so we've started the process. We're going to monitor how it goes over the next few weeks. And we know we did this during the holidays. So that's part of the monitoring. We're going to try to determine how this works as we go. The other thing, moving forward, what you need to know is that we'll see how this goes, and we'll try to move the opening to the other grades, depending on the success. We're going to look at of course, our own county numbers, because like Brendan said, it was real interesting that, excuse me, I'm getting a chat here. I guess you have an echo with my voice here, and I don't have a headset, so I'll do my best, Larry. We're going to, we didn't have any cases from August 9th until just recently. And when we made the decision to move back into school, that's when we had our case. So we're going to monitor the cases. And then we're going to listen to, we meet weekly with Dr. James and Mark Tompkins. It's been very informative. And we're going to make our decisions about the rest of the grades as we go. And I think it's probably going to be January before we truly get into the secondary. I think one of the things that we are doing right now, though, we see 2 issues that we're trying to address, and I'll just briefly state it. One is that we've always brought special education onto the campus, but we think there needs to be more. So we're in the process of developing a opportunity if parents want to come to the school setting for more specific guidance for a longer period of time. And then we also, I'm in conversation with a high school principal, Martin Yablonowski, and we've been talking about creating more student support sections for students that are having some engagement issues or just struggling on Zoom, because the one thing we've learned is that in-person is just better, period. It is. Now, there's a lot of things we're going to learn from this, and we're going to be able to take and use in the future. I mean, there's going to be a new way of looking at education, but in-person is still better. So we've opened up, we've seen some issues. I think we are better at teleschooling than we were in the spring, but we know that there's more that we can do for our kids at this point. So we got kindergarten in, and next week we start with 1st grade as well.
All right, thank you. Okay, Eric. Hi, Eric.
Larry and Michael, thank you for putting this together to give us a
Sure.
chance to visit with the community. I also want to say, Brendan, how great it is that we're in a county where we can meet weekly with our health officer, and that the county leadership is just a quick phone call away. That doesn't happen in every place, and we also have a very supportive community. And I agree that they really are tuned into the science. I do feel like we are the center of the universe, though, right here. And it is important for us right here. Back in March, Orcas Island transitioned quickly, just like all the other school districts. In just a matter of days, we handed out Chromebooks. We educated our students in how to log in. And fortunately for us, we already had the Google platform. Google Classroom was in place, which really helped that transition. But it was a very quick transition, just in a couple of days. And we moved forward from March to the end of the year in June to do our very best in distance learning. We worked hard at it. And it was a steep learning curve, not only for students and our families, but also for our staff. And Orcas Island entered into the summer knowing that we had a lot of work to do, that distance learning version 1.0 wasn't going to be sufficient in the fall. And we created a steering committee, 8 individuals on the island that came together to provide oversight for the work that was being done at the building level. The goal of that steering committee was to bring back students K through 5 on campus in person. That was the goal. At the building levels, we had committees that worked hard throughout the entire summer to develop 2 different models. We knew we would have a distance learning model 2.0, and we would have an in-person model. We started with the in-person model, knowing that was the goal of the steering committee. And it was amazing the work that was done at that building level that came up to the steering committee, and the work that was done by the unions that was involved from the very beginning. We got to that point and we really had high hopes that we would start the year off in this in-person model that we had developed that I think is very creative. We've invested heavily in the in-person model, and we want to make sure that we had the staff ready to go when it was time to bring students back onto campus. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't right to do it safely. So we ended up starting the year off in distance learning 2.0, and we've done an amazing job with that. And listening to the parents, we made adjustments. We put rigor and relevance into the schedules. We built in advisory times. We built in office hours that was needed, and we've moved forward with that. After about 10 weeks without a positive case in the islands, we decided to move cautiously, slowly going forward. And November 2nd, we brought back our kindergarten through 2nd grade in the Montessori public classroom. So we had those students on site in classrooms, our youngest students, those that we had the challenge to work with them on Zoom. You have to understand that we invested in staff to make the cohort groups 11 or less to a teacher or to a paraeducator. And we're able to work with those students in a safe manner. And those students, like Fred mentioned, those are critical. They're learning to read, and we need to have them here on campus so we can work with them. Not that distance learning wasn't working, but in person is so much better for those students. So we're a week into having students on campus. We put all the health protocols into place. We do health screenings before they get out of the car in the morning. We've invested in additional health aid to help our school nurse. We put sinks into the hallway, and we have built in hand washing times throughout the day. We take frequent mask breaks. We can do everything that we can to have our students on campus safely. For us, we really had a hope that we would have the remaining 3rd through 5th grade in our elementary back on campus within the next couple of weeks. I really think now with some additional cases in the county that we'll hold off until after the holidays. We will probably give it 10 days after we return, make sure everybody is healthy, and we'll start to bring the 3rd through 5th grade back in and meet that goal of the steering committee of K through 5 on campus. It doesn't mean that we're leaving out middle school or high school. We've had those students, some of them on campus. We have students with connectivity issues. We've opened up a commons area. They're able to come in, they're able to work from the commons area, get support from teachers, so forth. It's kind of that plus model that Brian talked about. We have students attending Camper Kyla for a day out of the week. We get a chance to see them, social and emotional. We check in with them. We have athletics happening on campus. And we have some academic support clubs happening as well. Our rule has been 5 or less on campus for an hour or less. And that's kind of how we have worked with that. And we've utilized outdoor spaces as much as possible. We are excited about getting our students back on campus. I think parents would like to see that as well, but we're going to do it in the safest manner possible. And that means slowing down just a little bit right now, waiting until after the holidays, and bringing the rest of the elementary onto campus.
Okay. I see Fred raise his hand, and what I wanted to say from now on is that in this forum, I will call on individuals occasionally, but if you have something you want to add to response leaders, just hold up your hand and let me know that you'd like to participate. I have another question. Fred, did you have something you really wanted to add onto this one?
I just wanted to clarify too, as well as working with the County Health and Human Services, which has been a godsend weekly. The county superintendents on the 4 different islands have been meeting weekly as well. And though there might be slight differences in how we've approached it, it shows how we have different concerns or different facilities, a different community, but we've been very much in touch with what we're doing and how we're doing it and taking each other's suggestions. So, listening to Eric, made me think of some of the things, some of the decisions I've made based on the decisions he had made, and thinking, oh, that will work here or it won't work here. So we have, just so you know, there's been a constant communication with the health department as well as with all the island school districts.
Okay. There is no denying that this school closures or not having school operate as regular has had a tremendous impact on our families and on our parents. And that there's a whole lot of concern about that across this community, the state, the country. And one of the questions that comes up a lot is, who's in charge of making these decisions? And what do they consider in making these decisions? We heard Brent say, well, it's really a local decision, although Frank James became really concerned about a major outbreak or whatever his criteria is, that he could make a directive. And then, so that leaves it locally in the laps of each one of you to figure this out. And so the question is the school board make this decision? Does the superintendent make this decision? What are the criteria that you use to make decisions about how far you're going to open? And how do the teachers unions weigh into this in terms of whatever impact or influence they would have? So short of me picking somebody that would start this conversation, does somebody want to jump in on that?
I'll talk about Orcas a little bit.
Okay.
And for Orcas, it's really been about collaboration and a unified decision on this. Like it's been mentioned, we meet weekly. We meet weekly with Dr. James, Mark Tompkins. We get information from them. We're on the same page going forward. All along this whole process, we've worked with our unions. We want to make sure staff is involved from the building level coming up through the administration. So we have that support as well going into a superintendent board decision. It is an extremely important decision and everybody needs to be at the table. So for me, it's really important that the board and the superintendent make that decision together. And we brought in Dr. James to provide the science, some of the metrics that's being used in his direction to make this decision. And in a board meeting 2 weeks ago, we came to that conclusion. It was time to bring back K through second grade in Montessori public and to transition from that distance learning into an in-person model. So it's really about getting everybody on the same page and finding those solutions going forward and the proper time to do that. So for us, it's a unified decision.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of echo what Eric said, and he's right on. This is a collaborative decision through all processes. We look at this COVID, the pandemic, and it's really like steering an aircraft carrier, because if you're going to turn an aircraft carrier, it takes conversations, it takes notifications, there's a process behind that turn or getting something started, and it starts all across the board. The weekly conversations with the county health officials have been just so helpful. We collaborate with our union, teacher union as well. And the union's, position is like any union's position. They want to protect their membership, and they're going to start with the most protective scenario first, and then start to ease back as they see, safety procedures go into place, or they see, cases of COVID go down. So they're watching that just as much as we are. And then ultimately, like Eric said, it's going to be a superintendent and school board decision, because you really want everybody, you want your representatives, you want all those voices to be heard at the table, and then to make a decision or a recommendation that supports your community as well. And so I think all school districts have done surveys, and we've got parent feedback, and each community is a little different, and I think that's part of the challenge too with things. And on top of that, though, we totally get, because a lot of us are parents too, and we totally get how hard this is for our families, and they're now in this new role of trying to help their child learn, and they're also trying to navigate either their job or home environment. And so your communities, each of the communities, you were seeing new ideas pop up and new events to help kids either connect, either virtually or some way that's a safe way that helps with that social emotional connection for kids. And that's at the end of the day, that's one of the lenses we want to use, is we use the what's best for kids and what's safest for kids. And obviously we want kids to be back in school. We want things to be, you know, back to normal as soon as possible, but we don't want to lose any lives through that process. And that is really at the heart of a lot of our decisions.
Yeah, well, you know, a superintendent wants nothing more than to have all the constituents be happy. How are you doing?
Well, as you know, Michael, you can't make everybody happy, but at the end of the day, you have to live with your decisions. And if you're making decisions that are keeping people safe and that are allowing kids and teachers to engage, probably not in an ideal state, but they're engaging and they're learning and they're talking about that, then you're on the right track.
You know, Michael, it's also about providing our families those options. We're in such a unique situation now that every family has a unique story and what works best for them. So for a district, looking at what can we provide as far as options for our family, the families that we have, what works for them, what works for the school district, and providing as many as possible without overwhelming the system. And I think that's where those surveys are very important as we get that back. Not everybody's comfortable coming back on campus. Some are being very successful right now in distance learning. So can we provide those options to our families going forward?
Thanks, Fred.
Right, and can we do that, Eric? And I think the key phrase that you had there was and not stretch the system, because there are we're doing all we can to create opportunities because there are so many variances in the opinions that are out there. But back to that, the original question, though, it is the superintendent and school board's decision, and we wanted to make that a united decision. But there's a lot that goes into that, and I know both Eric and Brian, and I know Kori went through the same process even back in June, starting with subcommittees and teacher groups and steering committees, and we worked our way through this process to inform the board of where we are. And so it's one of the most difficult decisions that I think I've ever had to be a part of course. And because you really have a heart to want to give children what's as normal as possible. And yet, as Brian said, we want to create something that ensures safety. It's a pandemic. There's no way around it. It's a pandemic, and we have to make those decisions. But we do, the ultimate decision does come down to the board and the superintendent, but it's guided by recommendations from the people who know the science and the recommendations that come from that, as well as conversations that we have in collaboration with our union and with our community.
Thank you, Fred. Kori, there's something to be said for size matters, and that you know, having a smaller school with the kind of flexibility. But who decides in your operation?
We had the teachers met all summer working on all the different ideas of what would work in our school, and was it possible to be safe and stay open. And then we have a school board that we ran all our ideas by, seeing what would work, talking to our parents, and ultimately felt like we were small enough that we could probably try to be in person and see what happened, knowing that we could at any point need to shut down. We're actually pretty surprised that we have been in school 9 weeks and are still going. So that plays back to our community and feeling like we have been fairly safe. Having had someone tested recently for COVID does still remind us that we can't be lax. We have to stay on top of the idea that it could be any day or any person could come down with COVID. So we're really trying to continue talking to our staff, making sure we all feel safe still, making sure our own mental health and our health stays good while we're in school. I will say it's very exhausting to be in school all day with masks and all the work that's required of reminding students to following the rules. There's a lot of compliance, but there's a lot of forgetfulness in students. And we have a 2nd through 8th graders, very happy to be in person, but it is a totally different amount of weight put on the teachers to be on top of what's required to stay in class.
It is. Thank you. So what's the distinction here? How is it that sports teams can try out and be on the field together without masks and doing that? How do we navigate those kinds of distinctions? Because I think it raises questions for folks about how does that work and how do we get there? Go ahead, Brendan. Unmute.
I'll take a just kind of touch on this a little bit. We're working on a hot topic that I think will come out sometime this coming week, talking about youth sports. And I mean, the superintendents and others in the community who are facilitating some of the things that are happening now will know a lot more about this than I do. I've just kind of been glossing over the surface, but there are a lot of regulations and guidelines out from the governor's office and WIAA that govern what's allowed and where it's allowed and how it works. A lot of things with COVID, there's the regulations and then there's common sense, and sometimes those match up perfectly and sometimes there's some gaps between those two things. I think what we want to do is maybe to try to shape some of these questions around, well, what about this and why is this allowed? Is just talk about the thoughtful things, the difference between indoors and outdoors. Kids in consistent groups outside is much safer than kids in inconsistent groups inside. And so I think what we'll try to do this next week is just messaging some simple, thoughtful things that, we can be making sure we're doing, not just in official sporting kind of scenarios, but just overall as kids get together to try to keep things as safe as possible. But, there's some things which I can understand why someone would think they were inconsistent if they were looking at them, quickly and without seeing all the guidance that's in the background.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brendan. I think this may go to concern that people just have about how difficult this whole situation is for children, and particularly for their mental health and their sense of any normalcy or regularity in a school setting. And so, folks, I'm wondering about that. Sports may be that place where we're working on that, but how are we keeping these kids healthy, and how are we helping them deal with several hours a day of Zoom instruction so in what meaningful and healthy ways are we addressing those kinds of needs? Eric, do you want to start?
I'll start. Michael, just before we leave that last topic, our sports teams, our coaches are doing a wonderful job. Our athletic director is doing a wonderful job. Our students go through a health screening before they come into the gym. We're wearing masks during practice, sanitizing, disinfecting afterwards. We're not using locker rooms. So I don't want that misconception to get out there that our students who are participating in sports and Orcas is not wearing masks or taking safety precautions, because we are. The social and emotional piece is one that, for me as superintendent, really worries me. I see the stress on our students. I see stress on our staff right now. And that is a critical area. I'm fortunate that I have a very strong social and emotional team. We have a system approach that we put into place with multi-tiered systems of support. We're not leaving that. It's working for us. During this time of COVID, we're doing what we can to enhance that. And really for us, it goes back to relationships and having the eyes on our students and to have those check-ins. It may be when families are picking up meals and we're doing a check-in with the student who's in the car. It might be when they're on campus in sports and they're engaged, that we're asking those questions. It could be as simple as a thumbs up or thumbs down. How are you doing at this time? Character, strong, calm, all the different programs that we have. Also, we've made the effort to build it into our schedule. If you don't schedule a chance for this to happen in the middle school or high school, it's just not going to happen. It goes back to that advisory and our counselors who are doing a great job. Safe advocates, we ask all of them to be at Orcas. So when students are out there and they're engaging at Camp Orcas in outdoor activities and they get a chance to socialize, we have our counselors right out there with them and our safe advocates. So we're going to continue to do what we've been successful with. We partner with Compass Health, who's been fantastic for us. mental health therapists on campus. We've got approval to do teletherapy now, so we've expanded the therapists that we can reach out to. Also, we have the WISE wrap services for families who are really struggling during this time. We can refer them at that point. But it is something we're keeping an eye on, and it's something that even as we go to an in-person model, it's critical that we have those check-ins with our students.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, can I just add on a little bit to what Eric was talking about?
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the social emotional component of the pandemic is definitely something that weighs heavy on folks. And I think what we're hearing, and it's really kind of a blessing to be out here in the San Juan Islands, because you're hearing a lot of community partnerships with schools. Eric mentioned a few. I know San Juan's doing a few. And Lopez is doing some as well. We partner with our public library for elementary kids, and they've got an open air program that's all outside, following safety procedures and protocols there, and attestations that assess kids coming in and temperature checks. And then we've got some things we're doing for our secondary students as far as sports and getting them outside and engaging that way. And so we're trying to, we know there's a concern there, and we're trying to address that concern. And it's part of the challenge, because you're not going to meet everybody where they want to be, but creating those opportunities for kids to have those interactions in somewhat of a normal setting. So the fact that they have to check in and do the attestation and the background checks and the temperature checks isn't the normal part of the process, but it's now the new normal. And the fact that they get to interact with each other and do art projects and play games at socially distanced guidelines helps. We've created a game called Noodle Tag, which is awesome. It's got the long pool noodles, and elementary kids get to play Noodle Tag, and they love it. I'm sure this game will carry on into after COVID. And so like Eric referenced, there's going to be some new norms that are new things that just come out of COVID, which are going to be great. At the same time, if we get stuck in the things that we're missing, it really it blocks us from moving forward at times. And I think that's where we need parents in our communities just open-mindedness through this process too, of just saying, okay, the school's trying and here's what they're doing. Is it what I would hope for? Maybe not, but yet there's an effort there, and yet there's some effort to address those social emotional supports and needs that kids have. And at the end of the day, that's where we're trying to get to. And obviously we're very open to other ideas and new ideas. It comes down to both time and staffing too with some of those things. So there are some other barriers there that don't always make it as easy to move forward with opportunities for kids too.
Mm-hmm. Fred, I see you unmuted.
Well, social emotional learning is such an important part of what we do, even when it's not in a remote learning fashion. Kids not going to learn if he or she doesn't feel good about who he or she is. So it's an extremely important part of education, and it is a difficult process right now. And it's on the forefront of all of our minds, and much of what Eric and Brian have mentioned with the community agencies that help support us, we utilize as well. He mentioned Character Strong. We actually really started that process right before we went into a shutdown last spring, and that has continued. But the work of our counselors is consistent, trying to reach out. And it's just not it's not easy, and it's not everything that we want or hope, but we're always open to more ideas as we continue to make contact with those students who need contact. And to be honest with you, it's not just students. Sometimes I think the isolation plays havoc on a lot of our staff as well. It's depressing at times. And I think we have to kind of work together and realize this is where we are, and we're doing whatever we can to support those students. And when it comes to activities, I'm glad that we can have those activities. I know that they are there's guidelines for how many can be out there. There's temperature checks. There's everything that you need to do. And here on our island rec just opened up a few things for our kids, because we knew it was important for them to have recreational activities. Kind of jealous of Camp or Kyla, gotta admit, but we will do what we can here.
Okay, thanks. Another huge concern that I hear from parents, and I know you probably hear from parents too, is how's this year or these years going to compare academically to a regular academic year? Is my student getting a full year's of academic growth? And I think I've heard everybody say, last spring, online learning, we learned a lot, and we've made a lot of accommodations, and we believe it's a lot stronger this year, and we're feeling a lot better about it. But where are we really in terms of, we haven't had testing for 2 years. We probably won't have testing this year, so we wouldn't have testing for 2 years. So it's difficult to monitor the progress of kids and really know where they are. What do you have to say about that? How do we know that kids are getting a full year of instruction, and how do we know how they're doing? How are we monitoring that?
Hard to answer.
Oh, Fred, okay, you go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just think that's really hard to answer because of the data. You're right. We're behind on testing. I think they're considering waiving the SBA testing again. They'll get together in January is the last thing I heard. And I can tell you, I watch not in the secondary school, but I listen to my own daughter who's at the university, and she just doesn't think she does as well online as she does when she's in person there. So it's really hard to determine exactly where kids are going to be. And yet I got to tell you, there are some who are so engaged that I think they've moved farther than they did when they were in the classroom with distractions. But having something that we can put our hand on and say, here's the data that proves it, is what's really difficult, makes that question difficult to answer.
Mm-hmm.
I just got to jump on with that too. I think Fred's right on with this. I think that just we see it in the eyes of our teachers and our students who, they're worried about the state's testing, and they're worried about the local district testings, and just kind of, they know that the challenge right now is in a pandemic is that time, that face-to-face time, and kids learn best that way. And we can't go back 20 years or 30 years back to the last pandemic and say, oh yeah, we lost this much learning in those years, and how are we doing compared to that? We're creating baseline data as we navigate this, and that's the challenge. And so part of what Fred was alluding to in the states, trying to defer the SBAC testing, which is the state testing, I think that's a good conversation. And it really would be irresponsible to expect school districts to do that testing and have the same results as they have had in the past with, under normal circumstances. So there needs to be some understanding in that process at the state level, so the school districts can ease up a little bit. And you can see, we really need to take the pressure off of the classrooms and the kids right now around testing. And that's an area where we can push back on a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Michael, I'll jump in a little bit on this. I have a little different thought on this too. It is challenging. However, we're doing everything we can to set that baseline of where our students are at. So yes, we didn't have state testing last year, and it's in question for this year coming forward. However, we move forward with our universal screener that we use within the district. We provided that to our students in the spring, and we've provided it to them already in the fall. We want to see where they're at, and we want to measure this as we go through this year. It's surprising for me when I look at the data with our building principals and leadership team, and as they review it with the teachers, we're seeing a lot of students really not with the regression that we thought would happen. There's some that are really taken to distance learning. It's removed distractions from them, and they're performing well during this time. We've seen a little regression, but not as much as we thought overall. So we are tracking that, and we'll do that screening 3 times a year in an effort to be able to really have that information going forward so we can make informed decisions. It's, for me, really about when you have that information, what's the next step? What's the interventions that's going to be put into place? And how are we going to go about providing that to our students as early as January? Time is going by. We'll be done with the first semester before we know it, and we have to act quickly and have those interventions in place.
Yeah,
Let's, yeah.
can I just piggyback on that too? Sorry, in Eric's scenario with our local district assessments, we're seeing a very minimal amount of decrease in scores too. We started that here a few weeks ago, and it is surprising. So that's a surprise to see that students are still, you know, engaging and learning in a way that we would hope that they would be progressing in a way. And obviously at the end of the year, we'll have a better picture of that as well.
Yeah. What's your greatest reach for teachers? What's their greatest reach in this and their struggle, and how are you helping them with that?
I would just say keeping students engaged. The virtual world allows for kids to pop in and out a little bit more under their control. When they're in the classroom, you pretty much can get their attention through, you know, classroom management strategies. In the virtual world, you know, you've limited your classroom management strategies. So there's a bigger push and intent from teachers to be more succinct and shorter with the delivery to keep the attention there and engagement level high. And then obviously, you know, buy-in from kids. So creating lessons and activities and learning opportunities where kids are fully engaged, or they've contributed into the idea and they're pulling some of their learning out of those tasks has really been probably one of those barriers that we look at.
Mm-hmm. Fred, the question was about the greatest reach for teachers right now and the biggest challenge that they have, but I'll let Eric answer what you think.
I would agree with Brian. Some of that is engagement. Some of that is the workload as we continue to ask teachers and staff to move forward with their professional learning during this time and all the new apps and programs that's out there. At the same time, that really over the summer, they worked extremely hard and didn't have a break. So being mindful of our staff and what we're putting on them is really a key going forward. As far as students, it's that engagement piece. And sometimes it really takes a lot of effort to reach out to those students that we need to be seeing in the distance learning classes.
Mm-hmm. Fred.
I think, you know, just when you're in a classroom, you pick up on nonverbal cues and you have different opportunities to just sit down with that child or group of children and differentiate with a little bit more success. And it's a reach to create, not only is it, you know, you can say that just getting the engagement from the students on a consistent basis is difficult, but it's also a difficult thing to create lessons that really in a remote setting that really make the impact that you want to make. So, you know, for some of us, the reach is not only creating a lesson that it uses a different delivery model, then you throw into the fact that there's some technology that maybe we're not used to, and we're learning on the fly. I think when you compare continuous learning 1.0 from the spring to what the state calls 2.0, where we made our improvements, a lot of it had to do with our own learning on how these programs work and the depth of the programs and how they can interact and create more engagement. The lesson planning is pretty intensive, and to get what you want to get accomplished, you have to put a lot of thought into it and then really work through these different this different software or web-based programs or whatever. So the reach goes far beyond just getting them engaged. It's creating the processes to enhance engagement, and it's a never-ending learning cycle for us as educators.
So our parents are also significantly impacted by this because many of them have become teachers at home. Most probably have become teachers at home, which they weren't necessarily signing up for or experienced to do. And so what has been your plan, or what are your plans for supporting parents? how are you helping parents take on what seems to be going on month after month after month now, and requires probably adjustments along the way? But what are we doing for parents? Kori, you want to start with that?
Sure. I think it's a little different for us since our students are in school all day. So we communicate with the parents if a student's struggling, but a lot of the learning's taking place during the day and not at home for most of our students.
Great. Brian.
Yeah, I think, what we've tried to do, obviously, we've broken down our lesson plans in that virtual model, and we're really working hard to allow students to go back and review those lesson plans at a later point, or we've done recordings where they're able to review that later, so they're able to, rehear what that lesson and what the intent of the learning opportunity was. In addition to that, though, we've really created a space for parents and students to be able to engage with teachers with office hours in that virtual world. So we've set up office hours for every single classroom and every teacher, and parents or students and combination can connect with teachers. The bigger push on this, though, really is about building the responsibility back on the students. So many times as parents, we see our children, our own children, as a parent myself, I see my own kids struggling at times, or feeling like, or I start to feel like they're failing in a way and not getting that. And so it really allows us as parents to coach our kids and say, have you talked to your teacher yet? Have you advocated for yourself? Have you owned your own learning that's coming your way? And putting the responsibility back on kids. And that was a learning curve for us just in the virtual model for the first month or so. And then we started to change our mantra out to families and say, because parents were coming to us, they were concerned about how their children were doing. And so we changed that mantra and encouraged them to not just not just handhold the child into learning, but actually coach them and then step away and allow the child to explore the learning. And what we're seeing is actually kids are owning more of their own learning. They're engaging at different levels. They're asking inquiry questions that help them understand some of the facts. So we're actually seeing a deeper level of learning from some of our kids that we would not normally see in a classroom or in a different setting. So there's a new aspect to this that's happening.
Thank you. Eric or Fred, what are we doing for parents? How are we supporting parents as teachers out there?
I think for us, Michael, it was really about getting off on the right foot at the beginning of the year. So we went through a soft start. We asked parents to come in with their child. We provided them a Chromebook. We walked them through how they would log in. One of the things from the parent survey to improve in distance learning 2.0 was a single access point, single sign-on. We created that for them. Also along the way, we have office hours, and a really nice thing that the building level principals are doing is monthly question and answer sessions with parents and families. It's nice for them to be able to connect that way as well, outside of just the office hours that we're doing. So that's really nice that they have that into place. The other thing is we just had a check-in with them in student conferences. So we were able to see some of our parents during that time. And we also, are seeing kind of what Brian is talking about is this independent learner, which will also be interesting where we go forward with this and how do we really work with this new independent learner that's being developed during the time of COVID.
I probably just could say ditto to a lot that the two have said. I think one of the keys for us was try to start the beginning of this year with a soft start in the elementary. We brought some parents in, and we talked about, especially the secondary, our difficulty with the differences in how students would access. For example, Zoom, we wanted a single point of entry. We needed the access to be similar. We were trying to create consistency so it made it easier for students and parents to get engaged without having technology to get in the way. And for us, we recreated, reimagined, relaunched Griffin Bay in a matter of 1 month because we were, and it's not a perfect fit all, but what it did is it gave more choices. A parent partner program instead of a scheduled teleschool program. So, you know, what we've tried to do is create opportunity for choice. But it is the heart of the issue that you brought up, that parents are in a position that they do become the teacher. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible for them to move away from that to some degree. So we do create the independent learners that we want. But that's difficult in the situation that we're in now.
Mhm. So there's been a lot of challenge here in the last, how many months? It's almost, what, 8 or 9 months now. And you guys look pretty good. I mean, it looks like you've held up pretty well for this, and we're all grateful that you are. You know, Winston Churchill, one of my favorite quotes is he said, well, you know, never waste a good crisis. And so this is a question for you too, Brendan, is, you know, what in light of the crisis, how have we taken advantage of it to reimagine school or community, or what have we learned from this that we can carry forward that would be lasting and powerful for us? What are the wins here?
I'll take a crack at that. You know, I mean, in my job pre-COVID, I spent a lot of time working. I've been struck by disasters of all kinds, and things that I always see are, you know, shocks to the system. There's a lot of challenge and struggle that comes with it, but there's incredible positivity and connection building that happens. And I think, you know, many of the folks here have been talking about this already, that, you know, over the last, whatever it's been, 8 months, I think a lot of people and organizations have come together to support each other in ways that maybe happened previously, but maybe it's been more urgent or more connected now. And I have no doubt that those relationships and those sort of patterns of support will continue, you know, long after COVID is gone, and that will benefit the islands and the kids and our entire community in great ways. I also think for all of us as individuals, I mean, when this started, it was a shock, right? Like, let's face it, it caught everyone off guard and has thrown us all for a loop and made certainly everyone here and many other people in the islands' jobs and lives much more difficult. But somehow we're getting through it, right? We're finding our way through it, and and eventually we'll come out on the other end. And there's beauty in that, and I think there's good learning in that if we make it through this, there are all sorts of other things that are probably even less daunting, but are still, you know, things we're wrestling with on a regular basis, that if we all pull together on, we can get over it. And I mean, that sort of sounds a little idealistic, but I think that's 100% true. And it's one of the great things about disasters. You know, it turns out Winston was right.
Who else? What has this allowed us to reimagine and create that will carry forward? Fred?
Well, that quote excites me because I think we can get a lot out of this. More than anything else, I hate the fact that we're living through this time. I cannot stand, as social as I am, being, for lack of a better word, cooped up, either in an office or in my house. I miss the whole social thing that is a part of my personality. But just the fact that it has forced us into some of this remote learning, I see that, I can't tell exactly what yet, but I see dividends coming out of it when we do return. The potential for teleconferencing. I see the potential of teleconferencing between the islands and their school districts. And I don't really, we shouldn't have another snow day. They can go play in the snow, but they can do their school as well. I just see that it gives us an opportunity to make education in some ways a little bit more global. So what we can learn from this is how we deliver education and make it even more engaging than it was in the traditional setting and what it is now. I honestly don't have, I have a lot of little ideas because I love to think about the future and where we can go and how we can make this even better than what we have been. I always want to move forward. And so there are some things we can learn through the technology that we're having to implement right now that can be used to enhance what we had in the past.
Thank you. Eric, you're open.
So, you know, Michael, before all this, my hair wasn't gray. Okay. It's interesting that I asked my SPED team just this last week this very question. And for me to hear it from them that, it goes back to communication has been enhanced, which has enhanced relationships, that we have reached out more to our families than we have in years past. We have that closer connection with them. I hope that remains going forward, that you don't have to come to the school to have a meeting. We maintain Zoom meetings, classroom meets. We're seeing a lot more videos coming out that parents can watch more than once or at their leisure, and we get that information out to them. I think that's critical. The other part of this is really going back to the community and the engagement of community. I know for us, we couldn't do it without organizations on the island, OIEF, OICF, Funhouse, who supports students, or Kyla, who supports students. It's strengthened those relationships, and that's critical for us. It really is about the island. If we really want to get our students back in school, the island has to have that as a desire as well. And we've seen that. And really going into the holidays, that's what's critical at this point.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Fred and Eric have said too. It's going to be nice just to be able to do parent meetings and just be able to do that virtually. I think there's some cool things that are happening there. Kids being able to meet with their teacher in a Zoom setting, in the afternoon or after school, or just whatever it happens to be. There's going to be some pieces that come out of this that are really going to help just navigate efficiencies and communication and just some strengths. The only thing I would add on top of this is that, and unlike probably Orcas and San Juan, the smaller school districts, when I talk to school districts under, about 300 kids, are really having bigger communication challenges and just management pieces, because everything now has gone to, 90% of my communications, or more than 90% of my communications are, either in a Zoom meeting or email. And that's the bulk of what I'm doing. And being understaffed at any admin level is really noticeable. And the smaller systems, we have to do all the exact same reports as the big school districts and all of those same things. But not having just the manpower or the personnel power basically to navigate that is definitely something that's new and causing us to rethink our systems in essence.
Okay, thank you. Kori.
Yeah, I would say some of the things that we have been talking about as teachers that we really like that we've put in place this year is like the mask breaks. So we take the kids outside at least every hour, if not even a little less than that. And realizing the need for movement has made the day seem like it goes a lot faster. And I think that's something we would not take away. Once masks are gone, I think we've decided the kids need to get up and move and be outside for a few minutes every hour versus sitting and doing a bunch of work for 2 hours straight. It just has made the day go really well. And we also, like, a lot of the social distancing has made a lot of less discipline problems. They're not touching at their desk, they're not touching at lunch, and yet they're still socializing. So we were like, well, there's some actually great things that have come out of this that we may keep after COVID times.
Great. Kori, will you help us close by being the first one to say whatever it is that you have gratitude or appreciation for?
Sure. I am really thankful actually that I live in this community. I'm very thankful for the staff that I work with and the parents that we work with. I'm thankful that our students are so eager to learn and be a part of things. And I'm actually thankful to be a part of the whole community because we're so small and private to be able to interact with Fred or some of the other schools or teachers has been able to be very positive and encouraging each other.
Yeah, thank you. How about Brendan? How about you?
Well, just echoing on Kori, I think nobody wants to go through what we've gone through, but if we have to go through it, there's no place that I'd rather do it than here. We've got the people and the relationships, and the small size works to our advantage. And, one of my jobs since the beginning of this, along with some other folks, is staffing the question hotline. And, we've taken thousands of questions since March. And not everyone who calls in on that hotline is happy when they call. But I've been amazed at the number of just like reasonable, good conversations I've had with those folks, where even if at the end they didn't give them the answer they wanted, we reached some common ground. And it's nice to live in a place where we can do that. We can keep things friendly like that.
Thank you. Eric, how about you? Appreciation or gratitude?
A lot of gratitude. Really, it goes back to our students, families, everything that they have gone through, how they have stuck with it. As far as staff as well, I think you have to include school board in there as well. It's been difficult on them. I mean, these have been really large decisions for them to make, and for them to volunteer their time and the amount of time that they've given. The community, the county, being able to work with San Juan County, we really are in the best location. Grateful for all that.
Thank you. Brian?
Obviously echo what everyone else has said, but it really is the gratitude and appreciation for the community partnerships and everybody just seeing a common need there, stepping in, brainstorming ideas, and supporting both kids for their learning and their social emotional well-being. That's been amazing to see that just kind of unfold, and quite often I find myself surprised by some of the conversations and some of the folks who I wouldn't expect stepping up and helping out and pitching in or coming up with these ideas. That's been a nice surprise and just rejuvenating. But as you can see, in our smaller communities, those relationships with everything from our parents and our kids on an island to our county health officials and the county departments and just the other island superintendents and staff there, those relationships have really been key through this pandemic. And I think that's what's helped us keep our sanity, although a little more gray hair on my side too, like Eric's. But I think that's really, is going to get us through it. It's good. It's not going to be a perfect model by no means, but at the end of the day, we're gonna have managed it well, and learn some things along this process. And there's a learning component here that I'm looking forward to us continuing.
Fred, how about you?
Well, I never expected to begin my career as a superintendent in the middle of a pandemic, but it is what it is. And if there was any place that this was going to happen, it needed to be here. And everybody has echoed the importance of this community, but it's what has kept me here for so long, and makes me want to stay here, even in this position, making these difficult decisions. And sometimes you don't even, you think you're right, but then you got to recheck yourself and say, I don't know, and do it again. But it's the grace of the community. It's the collaboration of the community. It's the community that will disagree with you and let you know, and then also agree with you and let you know. And everything is valid. I know the decisions that are made are not always everybody's favorite decision, but that's what's the good thing about the San Juan Islands, is that we do seem to work together. And that's the teachers, the parents, other stakeholders, and then you get even a smaller group such as the health department and island schools, working with Kori. I'm going to meet with Spring Street next week. And have conversations just so we can learn and grow from each other. And I think that collaboration is what's going to help us get through some of the issues we have and move toward actually seeing some return to normalcy. Because I know families want it. My heart breaks for families that really want to see it quicker than what we can actually feel like we can do yet. But that collaboration, in my opinion, in a community or in islands like where we live, has really been key to making this not becoming even grayer than Eric.
And I have gratitude and appreciation for each of you, because I know you get up in the morning and every day you're asked to create and to innovate and to figure out something to do that's never been figured out before in terms of how to deal with this challenge. And I know you regularly take baths in fear and uncertainty, and that and that you at the same time are asked to quell the fears and uncertainties of all those around you as the leaders that you are. And I appreciate that very much. And Larry, I appreciate you and the network for letting us have this forum, and not letting us, but for promoting and making this forum happen. And have tremendous gratitude for being able to be a part of this community in this way again. Thank you very much.